Hello everyone. Before the story start, tell me where are you watching from and what time is it?
The rain was a cold, relentless needle against the back of my neck as I fumbled on the doorstep. My apartment building was a gray, soulless slab from the 70s, its entrance a recess of stained concrete and a perpetually flickering fluorescent panel. My keys were a familiar, jangling knot of cold metal in my pocket. I was soaked, my mind already inside, on the sofa, on the blessed silence after a day of meaningless noise. My fingers, numb and clumsy, dipped into my coat pocket, searching for the jagged teeth of the Yale lock key. They didn't find metal. They found stone. Cold, wet, uneven stone. Deep grooves, rounded edges, the gritty kiss of ancient mortar. I yanked my hand back as if shocked. Stared at my fingertips in the sickly fluorescent glow. They were wet, smeared with a dark, gritty dampness. Not city grime. Earthy, mineral dirt. I looked down at the doorstep. It was the same stained concrete, slick with rain. I slowly reached out again, my eyes on my own hand. My fingers passed through the empty air an inch above the concrete, and touched solid, rugged cobblestone. The sensation was unmistakable. The hard, rounded tops, the deep, gritty valleys between them. I could feel the cold seep into my skin. But I saw only the flat, wet concrete. My brain screamed in dissonance. I pulled my hand back, wiped my fingers on my coat. They left smears of gray-brown sediment. My heart began a slow, hard knock against my ribs. I looked around. The rain-smeared street, the parked cars, the sodium vapor glow, all normal. I took a steadying breath, shoved my hand back in my pocket. My fingers closed around my keys. The familiar, reassuring bite of metal. I pulled them out, the ring gleaming dully. I focused on the lock, a modern, brushed steel cylinder. I inserted the key. It slid in with a smooth, metallic snick. I turned it. The deadbolt thudded open with a solid, modern sound. But under my other hand, braced against the doorframe for balance, my palm registered not painted metal, but rough-hewn, splintery wood, beaded with cold rain. I snatched it away. The doorframe was aluminum. I saw the aluminum. Terror, cold and slick as the rain, coiled in my gut. I pushed the door open and stumbled into the familiar, dimly lit lobby with its cracked linoleum and the smell of cabbage. I slammed the door shut, leaning against it, gasping. I looked at my hands. My right hand was clean. My left palm bore faint, dirty grain marks, as if I'd pressed it against a wet, unpainted fence. I scrubbed it furiously on my trousers. Upstairs, in my apartment, I ran my hands over everything. The formica countertop felt like formica. The glass of the window felt like glass. The plaster walls felt like plaster. The episode at the door began to feel like a hallucination, a synaptic short circuit from cold and fatigue. I almost convinced myself. Until I went to bed. My sheets were cheap cotton poly blend. As I slid my legs under the covers, my bare feet brushed the fabric. And for one heart-stopping second, they felt coarse, scratchy wool. A heavy, damp wool blanket. The smell of lye soap and closed air filled my nostrils. Then it was gone, and I was back in my own bed, my heart hammering. It was a tactile haunting. My sense of touch was drifting out of phase with the present. Not all the time. Only in moments of transition, reaching for a handle, sitting down, touching a wall after turning a corner. My eyes would see the contemporary world, but my hands, my skin, would report a different one. An older one. I became a reluctant archaeologist of my own life. Turning on the stainless steel faucet, my fingers felt the porcelain curve of an old pump handle, cool and smooth. Pressing the elevator button, my fingertip registered the grimy, painted metal of a manual toggle switch. Sitting at my computer desk, the smooth particle board felt, for a fleeting instant, like the scarred, polished oak of a drafting table. The past wasn't appearing visually. It was whispering through my nerve endings. The worst was the street. Crossing the asphalt, my shoes would report the hard, uneven percussion of cobblestones. Not constantly. Just a step here, a step there. It was like walking through a ghost city laid directly beneath the modern one, and my feet were occasionally sinking through the pavement to touch it. I'd be waiting for the bus, my hand on the steel pole of the shelter, and feel the splintery grain of a wooden hitching post. I started to map the sensations. They weren't random. They correlated to use. To intent. The doorknob felt older than the wall beside it. The faucet felt older than the counter. The place where my foot habitually pushed open the heavy lobby door felt like worn sandstone, not rubber tread. My touch was uncovering the historical function of a space, not its current form. I wasn't feeling a past. I was feeling the past of that specific action. Then came the day at the office. I was reaching for a file from a metal cabinet. My fingers closed on the handle. And I felt nothing. Not metal, not wood. A void. A terrifying absence of texture, temperature, anything. It was like touching a hole in the world. I jerked back. The file drawer was right there, brushed steel. I tried again. My fingers passed through the handle. I felt only the air on the other side. I could see my hand grasping it, but I couldn't feel it. The present object had become a phantom to my touch. Panic, pure and white, exploded in my chest. I tried my desk. My palm slapped down on it, but registered only a faint, dusty coolness, like stone long in shadow. The computer keyboard was a series of smooth, cool tiles under my fingers, typewriter keys. The present was becoming insubstantial. The past was becoming the only solid thing. I fled the office. On the street, it was worse. Cars were silent, weightless visual phenomena. The sidewalk under my feet was now consistently cobblestone, the asphalt layer gone completely from my tactile reality. People were the worst. Brushing against a shoulder on the crowded sidewalk, I felt nothing. No fabric, no warmth. Just a slight pressure and a chill, as if passing through a cold spot. I am in my apartment now. It is silent. I can see it all, the sofa, the lamp, the fridge humming. But nothing feels right. The sofa is a rough horsehair stiffness. The light switch is a porcelain knob. The floor is wide, cold pine planks. My own skin feels strange, rougher, colder. I am writing this by the light of a candle I felt in a drawer as a tallow stub. The laptop I type on is a visual illusion. My fingers strike keys that feel like nothing, while my mind tells them they are pressing against worn, smooth ivory. I am a ghost in my own life, haunting a present I can no longer touch. The past has risen up through the pavement, through the walls, and has reclaimed the texture of the world. I am stranded in a museum of the tangible, where every object is labeled with the memory of its use, and I am the only patron, condemned to feel the exhibits but never interact with the world outside the glass. Soon, I fear, my eyes will adjust. They will stop seeing the illusion of the present. And I will be left entirely in the cobblestone and plaster and wool world, a permanent resident of a city that only exists under the skin of this one, a city you can only feel when you reach for a key you no longer recognize. The rain had turned the usual beggar's spot under the bank's awning into a shallow lake, so he'd migrated to the recessed doorway of the old watchmaker's shop, a niche just deep enough to keep the horizontal drizzle at bay. He wasn't like the others, aggressive, rehearsed, eyes glazed with chemical need. This man was just still. He sat on a folded blanket, a wool cap pulled low, his hands resting palms up on his knees. He didn't speak. He didn't have a cup. He just existed in the threshold, a human pause in the city's foot traffic. Most people flowed around him like water around a stone, their eyes sliding away, but I was caught in my own indecision, waiting for a crosswalk signal that seemed to be broken. I stood there, feeling the social obligation prickle at me, the guilt of warm hands in pockets versus the distrust of city survival narratives. The walk signal finally flashed. As I moved to step off the curb, my eyes met his. Not a plea. An acknowledgement. A simple, weary recognition of shared space in the rain. It unnerved me. Without thinking, my hand dove into my pocket, bypassing the usual dollar bills, and found a single, heavy coin, a $50 I'd gotten as change from a stubborn vending machine. I dropped it into his waiting palm. Our fingers didn't touch. The coin landed with a soft, metallic clink. "For the map," he said, his voice a dry rustle, like leaves in a gutter. I was already stepping into the street. What? But the traffic was moving, and the moment was gone. I glanced back. He was looking at the coin in his hand, turning it over with a strange reverence. I shook my head, attributing his words to the rambling of a mind worn thin by the streets. At home, emptying my pockets onto the dresser, I realized my mistake. The $50 was there, gleaming dully next to my keys. I'd given him, what? A quarter? A nickel? I couldn't remember. It didn't matter. But his words echoed. Asterisk for the map. Days later, buying a coffee with a handful of change, I saw it. A quarter, but wrong. The eagle on the back wasn't right. It was too detailed, too localized. I held it under the cafe's harsh light. It wasn't an eagle. It was a tiny, exquisite engraving of the very intersection where I'd given the coin, the bank, the watchmaker's shop, the specific pattern of the crosswalk lines. My thumb brushed over it. I could feel the minute relief of the buildings, the raised lip of the curb. On the obverse, where Washington's head should be, was a perfectly rendered, minuscule street lamp, the one that had been flickering that rainy night. The date was this year. The mint mark was a stylized C for the city. My blood went cold. This was impossible. A novelty item, a prank. But the workmanship was inhumanly precise. The coffee turned to acid in my stomach. I paid with a bill and pocketed the quarter. That afternoon, I went back. The man was gone. The doorway was empty, just a damp patch on the stone. I asked the watchmaker through the glass, an old man with a magnifying lens strapped to his head. He just shrugged and shook his head, returning to the tiny gears on his felt pad. The quarter became an obsession. I bought a jeweler's loupe. Under magnification, the detail was staggering. I could see the texture of the brick on the bank, the individual panes in the watchmaker's window, even a suggestion of the rain streaks on the glass. It was a perfect, frozen moment of that place, captured on a disc of metal. For the map, he'd said. It was a literal map. A cartographer's nightmare rendered on a coin. I started checking my change religiously. A week later, I found another. A dime. This one showed the interior of the coffee shop where I discovered the first coin. There was the counter, the espresso machine, even a tiny, blurry figure that could have been me, hunched over the coin in my hand. The obverse showed the cafe's logo where Roosevelt's torch should be. The date was the day I found it. The city was minting its own currency. And it was giving it to me. They were never in circulation for long. If I spent them, they vanished, likely plucked out by some unknowing collector or lost forever. If I kept them, they seemed to multiply. I'd find one in the dryer, under a couch cushion, in the toe of a shoe. Always a location I frequented. The laundromat. My therapist's waiting room. The bus stop. Each coin a perfect, miniature snapshot of a mundane corner of my life, stamped onto legal tender. The horror was in the implication. The city was aware of me. Not in a spiritual sense, but in a bureaucratic, record-keeping sense. It was documenting my presence, my routines, and issuing a token for each location. A transactional record. I had given a coin to the man in the doorway, and in return, I was being paid in geographic specie. My life was being monetized by the municipality of brick and asphalt. Last night, I found the worst one. I was digging in a jacket pocket for my keys. My fingers closed around a cold, large disc. A silver dollar. My heart sank. I pulled it out. On one side, rendered with terrifying intimacy, was the view from my own bedroom window. My fire escape, the water tower on the opposite roof, the specific constellation of lit and dark windows in the apartment building across the street. On the other side, where Lady Liberty's profile should have been, was the faint, ghostly impression of my own face, reflected in the dark glass of the window, looking out. It wasn't a map of a place anymore. It was a map of my point of view. A receipt for my loneliness. I am holding it now. It is heavier than any coin should be. I understand the economy now. The beggar wasn't begging for money. He was a disbursement agent. He was paying me. For what? For my participation. For my continued presence in the grid. For walking the routes, for haunting the cafes, for being a consistent data point in the city's slow, silent audit. The coins are my salary. A pension for being a resident ghost. I look at the growing pile on my desk, a fortune in impossible change. I cannot spend it. It would break the system, or worse, draw attention. I am rich in a currency no one else recognizes, trapped in a transaction I never agreed to. The city is balancing its books, and I am on the ledger. And the only way out, I fear, is to be paid with a final, terrible coin. One that shows a location I have never been to, a quiet room, a still bed, a map with no exit. And on the other side, my face, but peaceful, and finally, worth the full price of admission. It started with a chill, a deep, damp cold that seeped through the wool of my overcoat as if it were cheesecloth. The coat was old, a thrift store find with a plaid lining worn silky in the elbows, but it had always been a barrier. That night, walking home through the shortcut behind the old brewery, the cold wasn't just outside. It was inside the coat. A localized winter centered in my right pocket, where my hand was buried. I flexed my fingers, trying to generate warmth, and my knuckles brushed against the lining. The texture was wrong. It should have been soft, frayed satin. This was rough, granular, unyielding. I stopped walking under a flickering security light, pulled my hand out, and turned the pocket inside out. The dim, erratic light revealed not fabric, but brick. Old, reddish-brown brick, with crumbling mortar lines and the faint, ghostly shadow of old graffiti. It was the exact brick of the alley wall I was leaning against. I could see the individual pores, feel the gritty dust on my fingertips. I blinked, shoved the lining back in. It was cloth again, soft and familiar against my probing fingers. A trick of the light, of the cold, of my tired mind. But the chill in that pocket remained. A deep, masonry cold. The next day, it happened again, in a different place. I was in the sterile, white-tiled lobby of my dentist's office, waiting. My hand was in my left pocket, jingling keys. My thumb absently rubbed the lining. It felt like cool, polished marble. Not like marble-patterned fabric. Like actual, solid, veined marble. I yanked my hand out, my heart skipping. No one looked up from their phones. I carefully felt the outside of the coat. Wool. Just wool. I slipped a finger back inside the pocket. Marble. Smooth, cold, hard. I stood up abruptly and left, missing my appointment. It was a conditioned response. The lining of my pockets was mirroring whatever surface I was nearest to. Not visually, to the eye, it was still the faded plaid. But to the touch, it had become a tactile echo of my environment. I became a clandestine researcher. In my apartment, the pockets felt like my own wallpaper, a bland, textured beige, and the pine of my floorboards. On the bus, the right pocket, against the window, became cool, smeary glass. The left, against the vinyl seat, became sticky, faux leather. Walking on asphalt, the lining under my thumbs became rough, pebbly aggregate. On the grassy knoll of the park, it became dense, damp soil and tangled root matter. The coat was no longer a barrier. It was a translator. A conduit. It was making me feel the city directly, through a layer of wool and satin. The comfort of a pocket, a private, personal space, was being violated. There was no escape from the texture of the world. Then, the mappings became more specific. Waiting at the crosswalk, my hand in my pocket brushed against what felt like a crack in concrete. I looked down. There was a corresponding crack in the curb at my feet, the exact same length and jagged pattern. Sitting on a bench of slatted wood, the lining under my fingertips became not just wood, but the specific grain, the rounded edge, the sticky spot of old gum I could see 2 slats over. The coat wasn't just mirroring general materials. It was mirroring the exact, local material. The very spot I occupied. It was a tactile snapshot, a braille photograph taken from inside my pocket. The horror reached its peak in the rain. I was under the awning of the library, seeking shelter. The awning was striped canvas. I put my hands in my pockets. The right one, facing the stone wall of the building, felt like rough, wet granite. The left, facing out towards the rain-swept steps, felt like sodden, dripping canvas. But as a particularly fierce gust blew rain under the awning, sprinkling my coat, the left pocket lining changed. It no longer felt like the dry underside of the awning. It felt like the top of the awning, soaked, heavy, sagging canvas, with the relentless drum of the rain pounding directly onto it. The coat was not mapping my immediate, tactile environment. It was mapping the total environment of the object I was near. The entire awning, inside and out. The entire wall, not just the surface my coat brushed. I was carrying the full, tactile truth of things in my pockets. The private, hidden underside of the park bench, splintered, gritty. The internal, damp structure of the bus seat, spongy, metallic. The alley wall wasn't just the facing brick, it was the cold, heart-of-the-wall brick, the one that never saw the sun. Last night, I made the mistake of putting my hands in my pockets at home. I was leaning against my refrigerator, feeling the low hum through my back. My right pocket, against the fridge door, became smooth, cold stainless steel. My left, dangling free, should have remained my wallpaper. But I was also near my kitchen table. And the lining in that pocket became the sticky, faintly sugary residue of a spilled drink that had dried on the tabletop weeks ago, a texture I had forgotten, but the coat remembered. It remembers everything. It is an archive. Did I now know, through my fingertips, the water-damaged plaster behind my shower wall, the chewed cable running inside the baseboard, the accumulated, greasy dust on the top of my doorframe. My coat is a repository of every surface I have ever been near, museum of textures curated by my own wanderings. I hang the coat on the back of my door now. I dare not wear it. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I approach it. I slowly, carefully, slide a single finger into a pocket. I do not choose which one. And in the dark, my eyes closed, I travel. I feel the gritty, sun-warmed brick of the south side of the bank at 3 p.m. I feel the icy, smooth inside of the bus's window on a January morning. I feel the soft, rotten wood of the fence in the community garden. The coat holds the city's skin, all of it, and offers it to me one terrifying, tangible memory at a time. It is no longer a garment. It is a sensory tomb, and I am its only mourner, learning the true, rough, unspeakable texture of the world I thought I knew. The argument had metastasized into silence, a living thing that filled the car like a gas. We were stuck in traffic at the junction of 5th and Meridian, the city's clogged artery. Rain smeared the windshield, turning the brake lights ahead into bleeding watercolors. My wife, Elena, sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, her profile a cutout against the gray gloom. She hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. The last words had been mine, clumsy and defensive, and they'd landed like stones in a pond. Now, we were just waiting for the ripple to subside, but it never would. I stared at the pulsing red light, counting seconds, drowning in the roar of idling engines and my own stupid pride. The silence was so thick I could feel it in my teeth. Then, she shifted. Just a slight turn of her head towards her window, towards the clogged crosswalk and the steaming manhole cover. Her lips, barely parted, moved. I didn't hear the words. The traffic was too loud. But I felt it, a subtle change in pressure, a vibration in the air between us that wasn't sound, but its ghost. A whisper swallowed by the storm of the city. My phone, face down in the cup holder between us, lit up. Not with a notification. The entire screen ignited with a cool, blue-white schematic. I glanced down, frowning. It was a technical drawing. A blueprint. Clean, sharp lines, annotations in a tiny, precise font. It showed an intersection. This intersection. 5th and Meridian. I could see the lanes, the crosswalks, the traffic light poles with their exact heights marked. I saw the subsurface infrastructure, sewer lines in dotted green, fiber optic cables in dashed red, the electrical conduit for the traffic lights in solid yellow. There were stress point markers on the asphalt, indicating wear patterns. A small, pulsing dot represented our car, a tiny, V7 annotation next to it. My blood went cold. Elena, what is this? She didn't look at me. She kept watching the rain, her whisper still hanging in the air, now given form on the glass in my hand. It's the fault line, she murmured, her voice so low it was almost subvocal. Right under the crosswalk. The concrete is compromised. It's been weeping rust from the rebar for 2 years. I stared at the blueprint. She was right. A hairline fracture in the foundation was highlighted, with a data tag, asterisk subsidence risk, 0, 8 centimeters per year. Corrosion index, high. Asterisk, how, I began, but the light turned green. The car behind us honked. I jammed the phone into my chest pocket and drove, my mind reeling. At home, the silence persisted, but it was different. Charged. I took out my phone. The blueprint was gone. The screen showed my normal wallpaper, a generic photo of a mountain. I pulled up recent apps. Nothing. I checked for new downloads, hidden files. Nothing. It had been a transient vision, a secret shared between her whisper and the device. Later, washing dishes, I tried to broach it. That thing on my phone. At the intersection. She was drying a plate, her movements slow and precise. The city talks, she said, not looking up. You just have to know how to listen. And what to ask for. You asked my phone for a structural survey? I whispered to the intersection, she corrected softly. Your phone was just nearby. It picked up the signal. It sounded insane. But I had seen it. The impossible detail. The specific, hidden rot. It happened again a week later. We were in a towering glass atrium, waiting for an elevator after a dismal couples counseling session. The tension was a physical wall. She stared up at the soaring ceiling, a complex web of steel and glass, and let out a sigh that was almost a whisper. So fragile, she breathed. My watch, a smartwatch synced to my phone, vibrated. I looked at its face. A schematic of the atrium support structure appeared. One of the major load-bearing beams, high up near the roof, was highlighted in flashing orange. A stress calculus scrolled beside it, asterisk lateral wind load exceedance, design threshold breached by 12% during Storm Ilara, October 14th. Fatigue cumulative. Asterisk. I showed it to her, my hand trembling. She glanced at it, then back at the ceiling. They used a cheaper alloy, she whispered. The specs called for grade 80 steel. They used grade 60 and faked the paperwork. It's in the city archives, but no one ever cross-references the archive whispers with the building's own hum. I began to understand. Her whispers weren't to me. They were to the environment. To the hidden systems, the stress in the steel, the corrosion in the concrete, the flow in the pipes. And my devices, being digital, network things, were acting as receivers. Translating the secret language of the city's bones into blueprints and data streams. Our marriage was a ruin, but through its cracks, I was being shown the hidden architecture of the world. She'd whisper her disappointment at a restaurant, and my tablet would light up with the plumbing schematic, showing a failing grease trap about to back up. She'd sigh at a bridge, and my phone would display the metallurgical report on its aging cables. She was a psychic, but not for ghosts. For concrete and rebar, for sewer lines and electrical grids. And her medium was our shared, broken silence, and my electronics were the Ouija board. The final whisper was last night. We were in our living room, the divide between us now a canyon. She looked at me, not with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness. She opened her mouth, and I felt the air thicken, ready to carry her thought. Don't, I pleaded, holding up my phone. It was off, the battery dead. I'd turned off my watch, my laptop, everything. She smiled, a sad, thin thing. It doesn't need a screen, she whispered. The whisper was for me this time. Just for me. And I didn't see a blueprint. I felt it. A schematic of us. A diagram of our relationship, not as emotions, but as a structure. I saw the load-bearing moments, our wedding, the purchase of this house, now highlighted with stress fractures. I saw the faulty wiring of our communication, the corroded pipes of our intimacy, the subsidence under the foundation of our trust. It was all there, in a flash of cold, clinical understanding. A civil engineer's report on a failed construction. She had whispered to the system of us, and I had been the receiver. She left this morning. Said nothing. Just took a bag and went. I sit here now, in the silent house. All my devices are off, stacked in a closet. But it doesn't matter. The house itself is whispering to me now. I can feel the draft not as cold air, but as a highlighted inefficiency in the window seal schematic in my mind. The creak of the floorboard is a load calculation. I am living in the blueprint. She has tuned me to the frequency. I am no longer a husband, or even a man. I am a diagnostic tool. And the city, and this empty house, and the ruins of my life, are patiently, whisperingly, reporting all their flaws to me. The silence is now full of data. And the only thing left to blueprint is my own crumbling interior. The argument had metastasized into silence, a living thing that filled the car like a gas. We were stuck in traffic at the junction of 5th and Meridian, the city's clogged artery. Rain smeared the windshield, turning the brake lights ahead into bleeding watercolors. My wife, Elena, sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, her profile a cutout against the gray gloom. She hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. The last words had been mine, clumsy and defensive, and they'd landed like stones in a pond. Now, we were just waiting for the ripple to subside, but it never would. I stared at the pulsing red light, counting seconds, drowning in the roar of idling engines and my own stupid pride. The silence was so thick I could feel it in my teeth. Then, she shifted. Just a slight turn of her head towards her window, towards the clogged crosswalk and the steaming manhole cover. Her lips, barely parted, moved. I didn't hear the words. The traffic was too loud. But I felt it, a subtle change in pressure, a vibration in the air between us that wasn't sound, but its ghost. A whisper swallowed by the storm of the city. My phone, face down in the cup holder between us, lit up. Not with a notification. The entire screen ignited with a cool, blue-white schematic. I glanced down, frowning. It was a technical drawing. A blueprint. Clean, sharp lines, annotations in a tiny, precise font. It showed an intersection. This intersection. 5th and Meridian. I could see the lanes, the crosswalks, the traffic light poles with their exact heights marked. I saw the subsurface infrastructure, sewer lines in dotted green, fiber optic cables in dashed red, the electrical conduit for the traffic lights in solid yellow. There were stress point markers on the asphalt, indicating wear patterns. A small, pulsing dot represented our car, a tiny, V7 annotation next to it. My blood went cold. Elena, what is this? She didn't look at me. It was unlocked. I pushed it open, a bell tinkling softly. The interior was as expected, airy, whitewashed brick, shelves of glazed mugs and bowls, the smell of wet clay and cinnamon from a nearby tea station. A young woman with paint-smudged overalls looked up from a wheel. Hi. Can I help you? Was this always a pottery studio? I asked, my voice stupid. For about 5 years, she said cheerfully. Before that, it was empty for a long time. It was a firehouse, like, 100 years ago. I mumbled something about just looking and moved past her, deeper into the space. The token's heat was a steady beacon, pulling me towards the back, past drying racks and kills, to a narrow door marked storage. The heat intensified, becoming almost uncomfortable. I glanced back. The potter was on the phone now, her back turned. I tried the storage door. It was unlocked. I slipped inside, into a cool, dark space smelling of plaster and dust. Boxes were stacked against the original brick walls. And there, in the far corner, partly obscured by a rolled-up rug, was an old, metal locker. It was battered, forest green, of a design I hadn't seen since high school. The token in my pocket wasn't just warm now, it was throbbing, a rhythmic pulse that matched my own frantic heartbeat. I walked to the locker. There was no padlock. With a creak of protest, I pulled the door open. Inside were not firemen's boots or coats. It was a time capsule of a different sort. A stack of comic books from the mid-90s. A Walkman with a cracked case. A faded denim jacket. And on a small shelf, a photograph in a cheap frame. It was a picture of 2 teenagers, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning in front of this very building, back when it was a dormant, boarded-up shell. One of them was me. The other was Leo. My best friend. The one I'd taken that trip to the city with, a lifetime ago. The trip where I'd gotten this fair card. We'd vowed, with the solemn drama of 17, to buy this old firehouse one day, turn it into a clubhouse, a fortress away from the world. We'd stashed some of our stuff in a locker we'd found a way to jimmy open, a secret headquarters. Leo had died the summer after high school. A car accident. I'd packed away the grief, and with it, every memory of our grand, stupid plans. I'd forgotten the locker. I'd forgotten the token. Until now. I reached out, my fingers brushing the denim jacket. As I did, the heat in my pocket vanished. The token went cold, inert plastic once more. Its job was done. I took the photograph. I left everything else. I walked out of the storage room, past the oblivious potter, out into the afternoon light. The token was just a dead piece of plastic now. But I understood. It wasn't a fair card. It was a key. A key to a door I'd walked past 1,000 times without seeing, a door in my own memory. It had lain dormant for years, waiting for me to get close enough to the lock. Its warmth wasn't a malfunction. It was a recognition. A homing signal from a forgotten version of myself, still sitting in the dark, waiting for his friend to come back and finish the plan. I don't wear those jeans anymore. I keep the token in a drawer. But sometimes, on my walks, I'll feel a phantom warmth on my hip, a ghost of that insistent heat. And I'll look up, and I'll see a door, an unfamiliar door on a street I don't know, and I'll wonder what other forgotten rooms are waiting, what other abandoned versions of me are sitting in the dark, having left a key in a pocket I haven't worn in years, patiently broadcasting a warm, silent signal into the world, hoping one day I'll walk close enough to feel it. It wasn't a dramatic discovery. Just a habit, a mindless emptying at the end of the day. Keys on the hook, phone on the charger, wallet on the dresser. Then the turn of the pockets inside out, a final disrobing from the world's detritus, a receipt, a crumpled tissue, a few grains of something gritty that I'd brush into the trash without a thought. For weeks, maybe months, the grit had been there. I assumed it was pocket lint coalesced with urban dust, the universal residue of moving through a city. But one Tuesday, the tissue came out clean. The receipt was crisp. And a small, perfect pile of fine, gray-beige sand pooled on the polished wood of my dresser. I stared at it. Not coarse builder's sand. Not the glittering, golden stuff of beaches. This was a specific, dusty, concrete-adjacent grit. I'd seen it before. Every day, in fact. It was the sand that filled the cracks of the sidewalks on my route to work, the sand that gathered in the gutters after a rain, the sand that was a fundamental part of the mortar holding this city together. It was this sidewalk sand. A coincidence. It had to be. My shoes tracked in all manner of things. But my shoes were by the door. This was in my pocket, the right front pocket of my trousers, which had a secure flap. How would sidewalk sand get in there, in that quantity, without me feeling it? The next day, I paid attention. Walking home, I deliberately avoided kicking up dust. I stepped over cracks. When I emptied my pockets that night, another small pile, slightly larger, trickled out. The same grit. I brought a pinch of it to the window, comparing it to the sand in the expansion joint of my apartment building sidewalk 3 stories below. Under the evening light, it was identical. I started an experiment. I wore different pants. Jeans with tight pockets. Suit trousers with deep, silky linings. Khakis. Every night, without fail, the right front pocket yielded a small measure of that specific sidewalk sand. The left pocket was usually clean, maybe a stray hair or a bit of fluff. But the right pocket was a dedicated hourglass, slowly sifting the city's foundation into my home. Then came the day of the different route. A detour due to construction took me 6 blocks out of my way, through a historic district with bluestone slabs, not concrete sidewalks. The sand there was darker, almost black, a different mineral composition entirely. That night, with a thrill of impending vindication, I turned out my pocket. Gray-beige sand. My sand. From my usual route. The blood drained from my face. It wasn't tracking what I walked on today. It was accumulating what I walked on always. My pocket wasn't collecting, it was remembering. And it was stuck on a loop, replaying the same handful of grit from the 7 blocks that constituted my life. I tried to break the cycle. I took a cab for a week. I worked from home. I meticulously vacuumed and washed the trousers. The first night I wore them again after the hiatus, the pocket was empty. Elation, sharp and sweet, shot through me. I'd broken it. Then, the following evening, after a single, unavoidable walk to the pharmacy, the sand was back. Just a few grains. But it was back. The reservoir had been refilled. The horror wasn't in the quantity. It was in the ritual. The silent, daily transfer. The city was slowly reclaiming itself through me. I was a sieve. A human filter, and the city particulate memory was passing through me, leaving its trace in my private space. My pocket was no longer mine. It was a geological sample bag. An archive. I began to examine the sand more closely under a magnifying glass. It wasn't uniform. Among the quartz grains were flecks of mica, tiny chips of brick-red terracotta, minute fragments of glass worn smooth by countless footsteps. This wasn't just sand. It was the pulverized history of my neighborhood, ground-down buildings, shattered bottles, eroded stone. I was carrying the literal dust of the place in my pocket. Last week, I snapped. I took the accumulated sand from a month, a sizable pile now, and in a fit of defiance, I flushed it down the toilet. A symbolic rejection. That night, I dreamt of drought. Of concrete cracking into infinite, parched fissures. Of the mortar turning to powder and blowing away. I woke up thirsty, my mouth full of the taste of dust. The next evening, I turned out my pocket. The sand poured out, not in a trickle, but in a sudden, shocking cascade. Far more than should have fit. It piled on my dresser, a miniature dune of gray-beige. It was as if the city, offended by my disposal, had made its point. Asterisk, you do not discard me. I am in you. Asterisk, now, I no longer empty the pocket. I let the sand accumulate. It forms a small, permanent lump at the bottom of my right front trouser pocket. I can feel its weight as I walk. It has become a part of my gait, a tiny ballast of place. I am afraid to remove it. I am afraid that if I do, the transfer will become something else, that instead of sand, I'll turn out my pocket and find a chip of the curbstone, then a piece of brick, then something worse. The slow sifting will accelerate, and the city will begin to take me apart, piece by microscopic piece, carrying me back into its matrix as grit and dust. I am a man with a pocket full of where I've been. And every step I take grinds a little more of me into the mix, ensuring that when I am finally, completely empty, all that will be left is a small, neat pile of indistinguishable sand on a dresser, ready for the next tenant, the next sieve, to carry a little piece of this sidewalk into their own private night. It was the kind of cold that doesn't just chill the skin, but seems to slow the blood. I was waiting for her under the skeletal branches of the oak in Franklin Square, our usual spot, though usual was a generous term for something so new and fragile. We'd met 2 months ago in the bleary warmth of an all-night diner, two insomniacs orbiting the same pot of bad coffee. Her name was Elise, and she carried a quiet with her that wasn't empty, but full, a library silence. Our dates were walks, long, meandering conversations that felt less like getting to know each other and more like remembering something we'd both forgotten. She was late. 10 minutes. The square was deserted, the benches like sleeping metal animals. The only light came from the old-fashioned gas lamp-style streetlights lining the paths, casting weak, yellow pools that seemed to tremble in the cold air. I was pacing, my hands deep in my pockets, my breath pluming. Then I saw her, a swift, dark shape cutting across the far side of the square. She wasn't walking toward me. She was standing under one of the lamps, her back to its iron post, facing away. I called her name. She didn't turn. I started walking towards her, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. As I got closer, I saw she was perfectly still, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to the lamp post itself. She was wearing a thick, cream-colored cable-knit sweater, the kind that looked handmade and impossibly soft. Elise? I said again, now 10 feet away. She turned then, and she smiled. But it wasn't a smile for me. It was a private, radiant thing, a release of some inner pressure. Her face, usually so pale, was lit from within by a simple, profound joy. And as she smiled, the light from the street lamp behind her changed. It didn't brighten. It bloomed. The harsh, directional yellow softened, warmed, and expanded. It swelled beyond its glass cage, becoming a diffuse, golden aura that bled into the air around her. And then, impossibly, it seemed to seep into the fibers of her cream-colored sweater. The wool began to glow from within, each cable and twist illuminated with a gentle, honeyed light. It wasn't a reflection. The light was coming from the sweater, passing through the yarn as if it were woven from solidified sunshine. She was wearing the lamp's glow. I stopped dead, my brain refusing to reconcile what my eyes reported. The lamp behind her was now just an ordinary lamp, a dull yellow eye. But Elise was a lantern. A soft, walking source of that same warm light. It clung to her, outlining her form, making the cold air around her seem to shimmer with stolen warmth. She finally looked at me, her smile softening into something more familiar, tinged with a faint apology. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her voice normal, as if she weren't currently defying physics. "I was listening." "The light," I stammered, pointing a shaky finger at her, then at the now dim lamp. She glanced down at her glowing sleeve as if noticing it for the first time. "Oh," she said, a small, almost dismissive sound. "It does that sometimes. When I'm really happy." She said it like someone might say, "I blush sometimes." She took a step towards me, and the glow moved with her, a portable dawn. She reached out and took my cold hand in hers. Her skin was warm. Not normal warm. Radiant warm. A gentle, penetrating heat flowed from her fingers into my frozen ones, a heat that felt exactly like the visual light from the street lamp, old, golden, and comforting. It chased the chill from my bones in seconds. "How?" was all I could manage. She shrugged, the motion making the light in her sweater shift and dance. "I don't know. I just feel things. Strongly. And sometimes, the city feels them back. This one," she nodded back at the lamp, "is lonely. It misses the gaslighters, the human touch. It liked my happiness. So it shared. We walked. She held my hand, and her borrowed glow lit our path better than any street lamp ever had. It didn't cast sharp shadows, it just made the night gentle, pushing back the cold and the dark in a small, intimate sphere around us. People we passed didn't scream or point. They just glanced, their eyes widening slightly, then sliding away, their minds rejecting the impossibility. A trick of the fog, a reflection from a shop window. But I knew. I was walking with a woman who could converse with inanimate light, and whose joy was a currency it accepted. In the weeks that followed, I saw other exchanges. A flash of frustration in a traffic jam made a car's headlights momentarily dim. A pang of sadness on a rainy afternoon caused the mist around her to thicken, catching the gray light in a private, mournful halo. But the smiles were for the old lights. The street lamps, the vintage sconce in a restaurant bathroom, the forgotten bulb in a basement hallway. They would pour their light into her, and she would wear it like a queen wears jewels. I fell in love with a lighthouse. A beautiful, human-shaped lighthouse whose beacon was fueled by shared emotion with the city's forgotten nervous system. It was magical. Until last night. We had a fight. A stupid, human fight about forgotten plans and perceived slights. It was our first real argument. In my apartment, words were said that couldn't be unsaid. Her face didn't crumple in sadness. It went still, cold. And then she looked at my desk lamp, a modern LED thing with a cold, blue-white light. She glared at it. A pure, concentrated spike of anger. The LED bulb didn't warm. It didn't glow. It intensified. The cool white light turned piercing, surgical, flooding the room with a brutal, shadowless glare. It was a light that showed every flaw, every dust mote, every line of hurt on my face. It was angry light. And then, it leapt. Not a seep, but a lash. A thread of that vicious, blue-white energy shot from the bulb and struck her black wool coat where it lay draped over a chair. The fabric didn't glow. It crackled. Static electricity crawled over it, and the light seemed to stain the wool, not with warmth, but with a cold, electric malevolence. The coat looked charged, dangerous. She stood up, her own expression now mirroring the lamp's, cold, sharp, hostile. She snatched the coat, and the static light clung to it, a crackling aura. "I have to go," she said, her voice like the buzz of the overloaded bulb. She left. The LED lamp immediately returned to its normal, innocuous glow. But the imprint of that angry light on her coat, the way it had obeyed her fury, it chilled me more than any darkness. She doesn't just converse with light. She commands it. And it obeys her mood, absolutely. I sit now in my apartment, all the lamps off, preferring the honest dark. I miss the golden girl who wore street lamp glow. But I have seen the other side of that coin. I am in love with a woman whose emotions become the weather of the light around her. And I am terrified of what happens the next time she feels something strong in the dark, near something old, and lonely, and powerful, that is all too eager to share. The silence in the apartment was a physical thing after Clara left, a thick, cottony absence where her laughter used to be. I filled it with noise, the television a constant murmur, podcasts blaring from my phone, the aggressive hum of the air purifier. Anything to avoid the echo of my own thoughts in the empty space. My pockets became a repository for this sonic insulation. I'd leave the house with a fistful of coins, not for spending, but for the noise. I'd walk, my hand buried in my pocket, jangling the loose change in a frantic, random rhythm. A metallic white noise to drown out the quiet. Pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, a democracy of clatter. It was on one of these numb, jangling walks that I first noticed the syncopation. I was cutting through the long, tiled corridor of the Fifth Avenue subway station, a tomb of echoes. My own footsteps were lost in the crowd's roar, but my hand was busy in my pocket, shaking the coins in a stuttering, anxious beat. And beneath the general din, I heard another set of footsteps. Clear, sharp, and distant, someone in heels walking with purpose on the opposite platform, separated from me by tracks and 100 feet of space. Asterisk click 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 click. Asterisk my fingers, moving of their own frantic accord, fumbled the change. The coins jangled, clashed, and then, for a brief, impossible second, they fell into a perfect, metallic imitation of that distant heel click rhythm. Asterisk jingle jangle jingle jangle. Asterisk it matched the click 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 step for step. A perfect, discordant harmony. I froze, my hand still in my pocket. The heels moved on, their sound fading. My coins went silent. A coincidence. A trick of acoustics, my brain imposing pattern on chaos. I started walking again, shaking the change harder, trying to break any accidental rhythm. But it kept happening. On a quiet side street, I'd hear the slow, dragging gait of an old man half a block behind me. My jangling change would, without my conscious direction, morph into a slow, heavy clink, clunk, clink, that paced his weary steps. Waiting at a crosswalk, the rapid, skipping steps of a child running would be mirrored by a sudden, high-pitched chittering of dimes in my palm. It wasn't me doing it. It was the change. It was listening. I emptied my pockets at home. I lined the coins up on my kitchen table. Ordinary American currency. Nothing special. I picked up a quarter and dropped it. A single, lonely clink. I tried to replicate the rhythms I'd heard. My attempts were clumsy, human. The magic, the eerie precision, was gone. It only happened in my pocket, in motion, amidst other sounds. I started to test it. I'd go to crowded places, train stations, park paths, museum halls, and walk slowly, my hands still. I'd listen for a distinctive footfall, the limp, the sprint, the hesitant shuffle. And then I'd gently stir the coins. Like a tuning fork responding to a specific frequency, they would begin to jangle, not randomly, but in a perfect metallic echo of the steps I'd isolated. It was a translation. A sonar. My pocket change was a parabolic microphone aimed at the gate of strangers. The horror began when I realized it wasn't just echoing current footsteps. Sitting on a bench in the grand, echoing central library, I heard nothing but the distant rustle of pages. Absent-mindedly, I jingled the coins in my pocket. They fell into a complex, familiar rhythm. A quick, light, almost dancing pattern. Asterisk tap tap pa tap tap. Asterisk Clara's footsteps. The specific, buoyant way she'd walk when she was happy, coming home from the farmer's market, her boots a cheerful tattoo on the hardwood. A rhythm that hadn't sounded in my apartment for over a year. The change was jangling a ghost. I tore my hand from my pocket as if burned. The coins settled. But the knowledge was inside me now. The change wasn't just a mirror. It was a recorder. It had absorbed the rhythms of the world around me, and now, in quiet moments, it played them back. The impatient stomp of my old boss. The hesitant shuffle of my father during his last visit. The frantic, skipping run of a dog I'd seen once in the park. My pockets had become a crypt of footstep ghosts. Every walk was a seance. I tried using paper money. It was silent, but it felt dead, insubstantial. The coins had a weight, a truth. A terrible truth. The final descent happened last night. I was in my silent apartment, the TV off, the purifier unplugged. The quiet was absolute, and it was screaming. In a moment of pure weakness, I put my hand in my pocket, where 2 quarters and a dime lay. I gave the gentlest shake. The change jangled. But not with a random pattern. It was a slow, deliberate, heavy tread. Asterisk clink. Clunk. Clink. Clunk. Asterisk a pronounced limp. A weight on the right foot, a drag on the left. I knew this walk. It was Mr. Henderson from 3 floors down, who'd had a hip replacement. But Mr. Henderson was on a cruise ship, his apartment empty. The change wasn't echoing a present sound, or even a recent memory. It was playing something from its archive, chosen at random by my lonely, prompting shake. I shook harder, a desperate, angry gesture. The coins erupted into a cacophony, a sprint overlapping a shuffle, a child's skip tangled with a weary drag, all underscored by the ghost of Clara's happy walk. It was a crowd in my pocket. A phantom mob of gates, all jostling, echoing in the tiny, metal space. I screamed into the silent room to drown it out. The coins fell silent. I sit now with my pockets turned inside out, empty. The silence is back, but it is different. I can hear my own heartbeat, my own breath. And underneath it, in the marrow of the quiet, I imagine I can hear them, the faint, spectral echoes of all those steps, waiting for a handful of coins to give them voice again. I am a curator of footsteps. An archivist of how people move through the world. And my collection is complete, and terrible, and plays itself back to me in the dark, reminding me that every person leaves a sonic shadow, a rhythmic fingerprint, and I have been gathering them all, unknowingly, in the small, dark vault of my pocket. I will never carry change again. But I fear I don't need to. The rhythms are in me now. I hear them in the drip of the tap, in the creak of the floor, in the empty beat of my own heart, trying and failing to find a new tempo in a world stripped of all its familiar, comforting noise. The split in my jacket lining wasn't new. It was an old wound, a frayed seam along the inner edge of the right pocket where the satin had given way to a rough, unfinished edge. I'd feel it when I dug for keys, a tactile hiccup in the smoothness. An annoyance, nothing more. It was my favorite jacket, worn soft at the elbows and bleached by 100 suns at the collar. I wore it like a second skin. I noticed the correspondence on a Tuesday. I was walking to the bus stop, my right hand tucked in the pocket, my thumb unconsciously tracing the familiar, ragged seam. It ran about 3 inches, starting at the pocket's mouth and angling downward. As I walked, my eyes on the wet, glistening pavement, I saw a crack. A long, jagged fissure in the concrete sidewalk, starting at the curb and angling diagonally across my path. My thumb stopped tracing. The crack was the exact length. The exact angle. A perfect, one-to-one map of the tear in my lining. A chill, separate from the morning damp, touched my neck. Coincidence? The city was a web of cracks, my jacket was old. I stepped over the fissure, my thumb now still inside my pocket. But the image was stuck, the inner flaw mirrored in the outer world. It became a game I couldn't stop playing. A few days later, feeling a small, hard lump of fused thread at the end of the seam, a place where a previous, clumsy repair had balled up, my eyes found a corresponding patch of uneven asphalt ahead, a rough, tar-filled patch that bulged slightly. The lump under my thumb was the bulge under my foot. Then came the puddle. A long, shallow depression in the lining near the shoulder, where the batting had clumped and thinned. It wasn't a tear, just a worn-away spot, a valley in the topography of the coat. That afternoon, walking home through a light rain, I saw it, a long, shallow depression in the pavement ahead, filled with a slick of rainbow oil and water. The exact shape. The exact length. My shoulder felt the phantom cold of that puddle before I even reached it. The jacket was no longer a garment. It was a tactile prophecy. A braille map of the path ahead. The imperfections in its construction were not flaws, but legends. Every loose thread, every pulled stitch, every thin patch corresponded to a feature in the concrete world. The small, sharp burr of a broken zipper tooth. A raised, jagged edge of a sidewalk slab waiting to catch my toe. The soft, almost imperceptible pill of fabric on the left cuff. A corresponding patch of moss growing in the shadow of a wall I'd pass. I stopped feeling the jacket and started reading it. Walking became a tense act of divination. My fingers would explore the lining, finding a new pucker near the hem, a sure sign of a heaving tree root ahead, buckling the pavement. A series of tiny, tight stitches over a hole felt like a grid under my fingertips. Sure enough, a manhole cover, its iron crosshatch pattern, lay 20 paces on. The coat wasn't predicting random obstacles. It was charting my specific route. My sidewalk cracks, my puddles, my uneven slabs. As if, over years of wearing it, the jacket had been silently recording the texture of my world, impressing it into its own fabric, and was now playing it back to me as a preview. The terror was in the specificity, and the inescapability. I tried different routes. I'd set out for the park, my fingers finding a long, smooth stretch in the lining. The path would be clear. But if I then decided to turn down an alley, my thumb would immediately encounter a new, unfamiliar roughness in the seam, a snag, a tight knot, and the alley would present a corresponding obstacle, broken glass, a collapsed cardboard box, a deep rut. The map updated in real time. The jacket wasn't a static record. It was a live feed. My intended path was being transcribed into its fabric the moment I conceived it. I became a prisoner of the forecast. If I felt a particularly nast, my heart hammered. I rounded the corner, and there it was, a missing slab of sidewalk, a rectangular hole leading down to the dark earth and pipes, cordoned off with fluttering caution tape. The void in my pocket was the void in the world. Last night, I reached my limit. I stood at my doorway, the jacket on. I could feel the entire, familiar topography of my walk to the corner store mapped against my skin. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see the proof again. In a fit of desperation, I took a pair of scissors. I carefully, meticulously, cut along the main seam, the one that mirrored the big crack. I sliced the satin, severing the connection. I put the jacket back on. I walked outside. My fingers went to the place of the cut. The seam was gone. In its place was a clean, open gap. I felt a surge of hope. I looked down the street. The long, jagged crack in the pavement was still there. But as I watched, as my finger touched the open gap in the lining, the crack in the concrete widened. just a fraction. A tiny piece of gravel dislodged and tumbled into the crevice. The world was not mirroring the jacket. The jacket was informing the world. By cutting the seam, I hadn't broken the link. I had instructed the world to create a corresponding gap. I am sitting now, the jacket folded in my lap. I dare not put it on. But I can feel its presence like a silent command. Every fray, every stitch, every worn thin patch is a sentence in an instruction manual for reality. I have been wearing a blueprint, and my daily walks have been the construction. I don't know who, or what, tailored this correspondence. I only know that the seam matched the crack. And now, whatever I do to the jacket, the world outside hurries to make it true. I am holding a needle and thread in my hand, staring at the open gap in the lining. If I sew it shut, will the crack in the pavement seal? Or will it simply find a new way to match, a seam of tar, a stitch of grass? I am afraid to find out. I am the tailor of my own prison, and every stitch is a sentence. It was the kind of party where the air itself felt expensive and thin, a curated collection of important faces saying unimportant things. I was adrift, a +1 clinging to the shoreline of my girlfriend's conversation with a gallery owner. Lila belonged here, her laughter was a currency, her observations sharp and polished. I was just a man in a slightly too tight suit, holding a glass of wine that cost more than my shoes. The noise was a solid wall, the clink of crystal, the roar of cultivated voices, the thud of bass from a room somewhere below. That's when I saw the woman by the bookshelves. She wasn't part of the swirl. She stood perfectly still, a glass of water in her hand, her eyes scanning the crowd not with interest, but with a kind of weary cataloging. She wore a simple black dress, unadorned, and her hair was a dark cloud around a pale, stark face. Our eyes met across the room. It wasn't a connection. It was a collision. Her gaze was like a searchlight hitting a prisoner in a yard. I flinched, looked away, but the imprint remained. A moment later, she was beside me. I hadn't seen her move. The party noise seemed to dampen around her, as if she carried her own cone of silence. "You look like you've lost something," she said. Her voice was low, not meant to carry. "Just my dignity," I joked weakly, the line sounding even more pathetic aloud. She didn't smile. Her eyes, a gray so pale they were almost silver, held mine. "Check your coat," she said, and then she was gone, dissolving back into the crowd before I could form a question. It was so bizarre, so abrupt, that I obeyed without thought. I excused myself from Lila, who barely noticed, and made my way to the cavernous, marble-floored closet where a uniformed attendant presided over a forest of fur and wool. My coat was a cheap, department store trench, looking pathetic among the cashmere and camel hair. The attendant handed it to me with a barely concealed sneer. I shrugged it on, my hands automatically diving into the pockets. Left pocket, a crumpled receipt, a sticky cough drop wrapper. Right pocket, my hand closed around cold, heavy metal. I pulled it out. A key. Old, skeleton style, made of tarnished brass. It was large, substantial, the teeth worn but complex. It felt ancient. It did not belong to me. I had never seen it before in my life. My heart began a slow, thick beat. Asterisk, check your coat. Asterisk, I stood there in the buzzing grandeur of the closet, staring at this alien object in my palm. It was still warm from my hand. It had not been there when I arrived. A logical explanation surfaced, the attendant. A mix-up. But the coats were hung meticulously, tickets matched. And the woman's words, they hadn't been about a mix-up. They'd been an instruction. Driven by a compulsion I couldn't name, I left. I mumbled an excuse to Lila, who waved a distracted hand, already absorbed in a new conversation. I stepped out of the overheated mansion into the crisp autumn night. The street was quiet, lined with other grand homes. I started walking, the key a lead weight in my pocket. Asterisk check your coat. Asterisk had she put it there? Or had she known it would be there? I walked for 2 blocks, my mind racing. Then, on a side street of slightly less imposing townhouses, I passed a narrow alleyway, little more than a gap between 2 brick behemoths. A wrought iron gate, black and ornate, was set into the wall. It was the kind of gate that led to a tiny, forgotten courtyard or a basement entrance. Something made me stop. A feeling, a pull in my gut. I approached the gate. There was a lock. A heavy, old, iron padlock, choked with rust, securing a hasp that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The lock was a perfect match for the key in my hand. The style, the size, even the patina of age seemed to correspond. My breath caught. This was the lock. The one I'd just passed. The key had been in my coat for this moment, for this specific lock on this specific alley gate 3 blocks from the party. The sequence was impossible: pass the lock, receive the key, return to the lock. Hands trembling, I inserted the key. It slid in with a gritty, satisfying smoothness that defied the rust. I turned it. With a sound like a deep, metallic sigh, the lock's shackle popped open. I pushed the gate. It swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, another impossibility. Beyond was not a courtyard. It was a staircase, leading steeply down into utter darkness, carved from the same soot-blackened brick as the alley walls. A cold, damp smell rose from it, the smell of wet earth and old stone. I did not go down. I slammed the gate shut, fumbled the lock closed, and yanked the key out. I ran back to the main avenue, my heart trying to batter its way out of my chest. I have the key. It sits on my kitchen table now, a silent, accusatory object. I have gone back in the daylight. The alley is there. The gate is there. The lock is there, rusted shut, seemingly untouched for a century. My key fits nothing else in my life. I have tried it on every lock I own. It is a singular thing, for a singular lock. The woman did not give me a key to a future. She gave me a key to a past I had already walked by. A door I had already closed, by the simple act of passing it. Her instruction wasn't to open it. It was to discover that I could. That the tools for opening the strange, dark, forgotten doors of this city are sometimes deposited in your pocket by a stranger who knows you've already reached the threshold. I haven't told Lila. She would think I'm mad. Maybe I am. I stare at the key. I know where it goes. I know the lock is waiting, 3 blocks from where I was told to check my coat. The party, the noise, Lila's world, it all feels like a distant dream. The only real things are this cold brass key and the certain, chilling knowledge that some doors aren't meant to be found. They're meant to find you, and to leave you with the means to open them, long after you've walked away, just to see if you're brave enough, or foolish enough, to turn back. It began with a single, stubborn thread. A loose end on the cuff of my favorite wool sweater, charcoal gray and worn soft as a whisper. I'd catch it on a drawer pull, on the edge of my desk, and I'd absently wind it back around the yarn, tucking it in. But the next day, it would be out again, longer, as if it were slowly unraveling from the inside out. I finally took scissors to it, snipping it flush. The next morning, the thread was back. Not dangling, but different. It was no longer gray wool. It was a thin, tough filament of metallic gray, the color of old trolley track. When I touched it, it felt like wire. That was the first stitch. Then, the pocket of my winter coat. The lining ripped, a common enough wear. I meant to sew it. I got out my kit, black thread, a needle. But when I turned the coat inside out, I saw the repair was already underway. Fine, precise stitches, in a thread that wasn't black, but a sooty, gritty brown, had begun to close the tear. The stitches were tiny, perfect, industrial. They didn't look handmade. They looked machined. And the pattern, it wasn't a simple running stitch. It was a complex, interlocking grid, like the map of a microchip or the support beams of a tiny bridge. I hadn't done it. I couldn't have done it if I'd tried. I showed it to my friend Maya. She peered at it, squinting. Weird. Must have caught it on something at the tailor. Looks structural. Structural. That was the word. The city wasn't mending my clothes. It was reinforcing them. Integrating them. The changes accelerated. The elbows of my shirts, where I leaned on my desk, didn't thin and wear through. Instead, the fabric subtly thickened, developing a faint, cross-hatched texture that felt like the non-slip grip on a bus handrail. The seams of my jeans, instead of bursting, grew stronger, the stitching turning a dark, asphalt black and doubling, then tripling, into sturdy, ridged lines like lane dividers. I bought new clothes. A crisp, white cotton button-down. Within a week, a faint, gray grid began to appear at the stress points, the shoulders, the button placket. It looked like the shadow of a city map projected onto the fabric. The grid lines were streets. I could trace them with my finger, feel the slight raised texture. My blue chinos developed a persistent, dusty beige stain at the hem, no matter how often I washed them. It wasn't dirt. It was the exact color and granular texture of the sandstone used in the old library's foundation. My clothes were no longer possessions. They were becoming exhibits. Archives of my movement, my habits, my friction with the urban environment. The city was using my body as a loom, weaving its own identity, its grime, its geometry, its materials, directly into what I wore. The horror wasn't in the transformation itself, but in the specificity. The cable knit pattern on a new scarf began to subtly morph, the braids resolving into tiny, intricate renderings of fire escape ladders. The fleece lining of my gloves developed a nap that, when brushed one way, felt like smooth park grass, brushed the other, it felt like the gritty pebbling of a concrete wall. My clothes were becoming tactile maps of my experiences. I tried to rebel. I bought a bright, canary yellow rain slicker, a violent shock of color against the city's gray palette. It repelled water perfectly. But after a single walk in a drizzle, when I hung it to dry, I saw that the water had beaded and run not in random paths, but in perfect, minute tributaries that traced the sewer system of my downtown route. The stains they left were a pale, chemical gray, the color of runoff. The city had drawn its plumbing diagram on my protest. The final surrender was the sound. My clothes began to acquire a faint acoustics. The reinforced seams of my coat would make a soft, zip-like hiss when I moved, identical to the sound of a distant bus's air brakes. The wire-like thread on my sweater cuff would sometimes, in utter silence, emit a high, tinny hum, the frequency of the failing transformer on my block. My wardrobe was tuning itself to the city's frequency. Last night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. I was wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. I ran my hands over the shirt. The cotton was soft, but underneath, I could feel a new, faint ridge running across my chest. I got up, went to the mirror, and pulled the fabric tight. There, woven into the very knit, was a pale, raised line. It followed the exact path of the new bike lane they'd painted on my street last week. A route I used every day. I understood then. There was no escape. The city was not an external force. It was a symbiotic organism. It saw my clothes as an extension of its own infrastructure, a mobile, living part of the whole. It was maintaining me. Upgrading me. Ensuring I was suited to my environment, literally. My fraying edges were being patched with its materials. My weak points were being fortified with its engineering. I look at my closet now. It is no longer a collection of garments. It is a rack of blueprints, of schematics, of tailored maps. To put anything on is to wear a piece of the city's skin, to move wrapped in its plans. The weaving is nearly complete. Soon, I fear, there will be no distinction. I will step outside, and I will not be a man wearing a coat. I will be a walking piece of architecture, a sentient, bipedal extension of the grid, my every thread vibrating in tune with the hum of the wires and the sigh of the pavement, forever a part of the tapestry I once thought I merely lived in.